me welcome back Dr. Amara Enyia. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Great to see you. It looks like you didn't hesitate after you lost the race. You rolled up your sleeves and you're out there getting busy. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing since losing the mayoral race in Chicago.
Well, yeah, so the world just everything turned upside down. So in 2019, obviously, I took a little bit of time to reflect after the race was over, but the work never stops. And so soon thereafter, we started working again in community. The pandemic hit. And so I started organizing actually with colleagues to just helping to set up mutual aid for folks in the communities. Just really looking for ways to support. And then we had, last summer we had the uprisings. And of course, Chicago was one of the cities where everything went up. And so just started organizing again, folks in their communities, and really just trying to bring to the forefront the issues that we had talked about, that I had talked about all throughout the campaign. It's interesting, the last couple of years have really spoken to the things that we talked about back in 2018 and 2019.
And it's sad, because I'm watching Lori Lightfoot in the news a lot. She's fighting with teachers. She's fighting, getting hammered appropriately, because we must hold people accountable who are sitting in that seat. And deals are being made that are questionable. And I'm looking at Chicago once again being this kind of epicenter for dysfunction. And it's Black people in charge. So it's hard to have the argument, right? Because Black people, you got Black police, you got, talk about it through your lens as a person who's living in Chicago, who also has been organizing in Chicago, the people who need things the most. Talk about what you see and what can we do to make this mayoralty of Lori Lightfoot better for the people who live there, because we don't want her to fail. We need success for the people who live in Chicago.
Sure. I mean, it's what it really means is that we cannot settle for symbolism. We cannot settle for identity politics as a substitute for the tangible, material improvements in people's day-to-day lives that they need, that they deserve. And I think what happened in Chicago is that a lot of people unfortunately fell for a lot of rhetoric that was not backed up by substance, and they wanted to check boxes, identity boxes, instead of really looking at the track record of the individual. And so we now have what we have, where there are a lot of complaints about reneging on almost all of the campaign promises. And there's just a lot of buyer's remorse, if you will, with the current leadership. And so we have to really step up we just have to really understand that it's not enough to simply have Black people in positions of leadership. The politics is not necessarily guided simply by the skin color, simply by the race. And we're learning that difficult lesson in Chicago, where less than a year after taking office, there was a teacher strike. We just barely averted a teacher strike a couple of weeks ago. We had the situation with Anjanette Young, the woman, the social worker who was busted in on, completely disrespected by the police department, and the mayor, involved, unfortunately, in covering it up. In fact, a study just came out maybe today, I think, that said that Chicago is the most corrupt city in the United States. We have a lot of work to do. And I think part of it is, yes, holding the leadership, holding the administration accountable, because we're on an airplane and you want the pilot to be clear-minded, competent, and to do what needs to be done. So you don't want your leadership to fail, but it also requires people to demand more from leadership, not just checking boxes, but to actually do things that will change the material circumstances of our city, and especially in the communities and for people who have been overlooked by the city's leadership for decades.
You have a law degree. We're talking with Dr. Amara Enyia, and you also have a PhD in education policy, and I always love people who want to go back and study a thing. You want to master a thing. You want to embrace the elements so that you can speak from a position of knowledge, not rhetoric, like you talked about. I am committed on this broadcast and this platform to collect as many organizers as possible, because we don't have, I think, the opportunity or the luxury to get it wrong again. I think we have a very limited bandwidth to get it together, meaning coming together and actually building the world we want to live in. And so I want to build the blueprint for that. What does that look like? And Chicago keeps coming up as it's almost like a dog whistle, particularly for some political folk, they use Chicago as a dog. It's not the most dangerous city in the country, not by far. It's not the poorest city in the country. It doesn't have the worst education in the country, but yet it becomes kind of the symbol for dysfunction, as you mentioned, corruption. So moving forward, there will be another election. Hopefully Chicagoans will make a different choice. Maybe they'll show up in greater numbers for their own well-being. But as you just mentioned, we're also in a pandemic where the schools are pressured, teachers are pressured in a way that we've never seen in the last 100 years, let's say, since the Spanish flu.
Right.
As a person that studied education policy, I believe that this is an opportunity to dismantle dysfunction and put it back together, or maybe reimagine what schools should look like. In the African tradition of, circular learning and not regurgitation and question asking. Socrates got that from Africa. Like maybe, grades and putting things in a hierarchical system where kids feel like I'm in the slow class and I'm in the smart class. Maybe all that needs to be dismantled too, and start looking at how children learn, because they all can learn. They have a brain.
Of course, absolutely. And that is probably one of the most, I guess, tragic things coming out of the pandemic is there was and possibly is a real opportunity to completely reimagine our institutions. When it comes to education, the pandemic was an opportunity to completely overhaul how we do education in Chicago, because we have some deep-seated inequities that are embedded in our educational institutions. Everything from having selective enrollment schools that are that more white students get into than Black and brown folks in the city, to the school funding disparity where the schools that are in more poor neighborhoods simply have less funding. There is how we learn, how people gather together to learn. The sky was the limit to reimagine that. And yet what we saw was digging in of the heels dug in to say, we're going to reopen, we're going to put in these measures to mitigate COVID. But there wasn't anything beyond, anything imaginative or creative about it. It was almost like the premise was we're going to keep trying to do the same thing we've always done and just put these measures in so we don't all get sick and die. That to me is disappointing. The fact that we never reimagined even our police department. Chicago's one of the cities that dug its heels in when other cities were actually moving toward defunding, reallocating. They were trying to be responsive to what was coming out of communities, and Chicago sort of dug its heels in. And so you have to think about when the pandemic hit, no one could have predicted. But your values will tell you and will show you what you actually believe. And if our values are to revert back to doing things the way we've always done it, that tells you that this city is not moving in the right direction. It's not actually moving into the future. And we need the kind of leadership who, in these times of crisis, is going to be willing to think outside the box and to do things differently, understanding that even going back to pre-pandemic conditions is unacceptable, that we have to move forward, but in a way that's different from what we've done in the past.
We're talking with Amara, doctor. Let me give her props because she went to a lot of, classes and spent a lot of time in school. You earned that. Dr. Amara Enyia, and as you're talking, I'm disappointed. I started off the show talking about race, and, I got into a conversation with one of our listeners about, what Coca-Cola is doing in terms of, mitigating the impact of white supremacy and white nationalism, which is baked into our system, right? And he got offended, and, accused me of race baiting or this whole channel or what have you. But let's remove race, because again, Chicago, Black mayor, you have a Black police chief, you have, I don't know if your head of teachers Black, but, the predominance of teachers are Black. So let's remove race and start dealing with it, because I think in many ways that race becomes a red herring or a hamper or an albatross that we carry, because we're going to give more grace to these folk because they have a certain particular skin color or hue. Let's look at, like you said, how do we get to that place where we're looking at receipts and we're looking at accomplishments and not looking at, like you said, identity?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's what is it, the saying that past performance is a predictor of future performance, or basically that, what is the person's track record? What is the person's history of actually acting on the things that they speak about during a campaign? I mean, Chicago is ground zero. Really in the state of Illinois, we now have a new Black Speaker of the House in Illinois. We have a Black Attorney General. We have a Black Cook County State's Attorney. So we have to evolve to understand that being simply being Black or being the first Black is not enough. And I think it takes, maybe there's some fear or hesitancy about just saying that, because we all want to congratulate and we all want to acknowledge when there's a first anything, but it's not enough, because by every metric, Black communities are still falling behind. So we have to evolve to say, it's not enough to just check the box and it's a Black person. What will that person do to materially change the conditions of people in our communities? And to do that, you have to look at their track record. What have they done in the past? The current mayor was on the police board, was involved in many different entities that were supposedly reforming police for years prior to the election. But none of that really, and organizers and grassroots activists warned totally that this mayor was not the one who held the values that the city needed, but it was easy to dismiss. One, because we tend to assign competence to wealth, right? And we look at income and we want to ascribe certain characteristics that if a person is wealthy, that they must be competent. But yet all of our previous mayors have been wealthy and they led us on the brink of financial ruin as a city. So instead of people looking at, okay, well, if you have someone who understands what it's like to pay those tickets off, to have student loans, to be trying to make sure that they can pay their rent, that's the kind of person that I want sitting at the tables where policies are made, because I know that they can advocate for me. And we missed that opportunity in Chicago because we were looking at, the size of the person's bank account, or we were looking at the rhetoric, simply what they said they would do. And we wanted to have the first Black this or first Black that. And now, 2 years on, everyone's salty, for a better word, about what we had. And it's not too late to do better. And it's not about even the current mayor. It's just to say, as people, as Black people in particular, we have to evolve in our thinking about what it takes, the kind of drastic changes away from the status quo that will raise our living circumstances in the United States. And it's not going to be by good intentions and flowery words. It has to be by specific policies that show a different set of values than the ones that are about privatization and this neoliberal agenda that our city is experiencing.
I know you're a political strategist, Dr. Enyia. Are you going to run again, or are you going to do something else? I'm just curious.
Well, I'm still kind of recovering from the last time.
Oh, come on. You recovered already. I see you. I asked this because, when I'm shopping for things, I look at the reviews. We do that, right? We look at the reviews. And then if it's electronics, I want a side by side. So I just bought this shake machine that, is supposed to shake the fat off of me, and I hope it works. But there are like several of them on the market. So I put them side by side by side. So there's 3 of them I was looking at. And then they have the little checks of what they do, how many, how much does it shake, different, modes, modem. What did the people say? I always go to the ones, the people that are disgruntled. Why are they disgruntled? Oh, the bands, I'm not using those anyway. So I go through. Should we have like a scorecard for everyone who's running at a glance? Because, people have short attention spans, that we can share on social media with a side by side of all the candidates and just like 4 key issues. So police reform. You come from a city that gave us a mayor that covered up the murder of a 17-year-old. His name was Laquan McDonald. Yesterday, I talked about Rodney Reese, the 18-year-old from Plano, Texas, who was arrested for walking home, and Elijah McClain, who in Colorado was murdered by police. Basically, no recourse, no accountability, but they said it was wrong that they even stopped him. Okay, what can we do to have like kind of a one look education, police reform? There's got to be something in there with economics. We gotta have something. Maybe there's a basic income plan. I don't know. I think you might be onto that. You're an economics expert as well. What are the 4 issues that should be on a card like that, and who can produce that?
I think definitely the economic issue is fundamental, because without economic resilience, without economic strength, you can't really have political strength. And I think we're seeing that on a number of levels. So definitely the economic agenda of the city, the education, public safety, what it means to have public safety in our communities. and environmental issues. These are public health issues that we overlook, but it's very real when you don't have clean air. It's very real when your soil is contaminated. And in our communities, we are dealing with environmental justice issues day in and day out. And so we can put those on the table, and I think we should. I think also getting over the sort of cynicism of folks who have always felt that the system did not work for them. And for me, that was a big thing. Like, so many people have checked out of the voting process, the electoral process, because they feel like, well, it's going to be rigged anyway, or, well, no one really represents my interests. And so when I was running, one of the best things was seeing people who said, I've never voted before. I'm going to vote in this election because of you, or even young people. Getting them to believe that the system can actually work for them, that's a huge hurdle that we have to overcome. The other thing is that, folks can say a lot, but again, with the current mayor, a lot was said. The campaign platform is almost the opposite of what's actually taking place. And it's far too easy, I think, for people to get elected without having any intention of doing the things that they claimed during the election cycle. And I'm not quite sure how to get past that. I can only speak for myself that everything I said, I was very clear, like, that's what I'm going to do, because I don't have any interest I'm not just trying to be in the role for the title. I don't need that. There are less stressful jobs that I could be doing. But when you have someone who is more interested in being something than doing something, they'll say whatever it takes to get into office. And then we are all left sort of holding the bag when we find that everything that they said is they had no intention of actually doing it. And that's unfortunately what we're seeing now. But it also is part of the reason why the voter turnout, even in a so-called historic runoff, was perhaps 31%. That tells you more about how the system has failed Chicagoans for generations, even than the candidates or the quality of candidates. Because if we can't come out more than 30% in an election, it tells you that the system is designed to suppress votes, that it's designed to keep quality candidates from participating, that it's designed to have people feeling sort of powerless and helpless, like they don't even have a right to participate in the electoral process. And I don't know if we've gotten over that in Chicago yet.
Well, let's work offline. Part of the thing that I'd like to do is talk to people on the mic and then talk to people off the mic. Sure. Because that's where the work is done in the unseen. And the election is, 2022, 2023? When's the next mayoral? 2022. We got to get started now with dismantling some of these spaces and do that groundwork. And maybe we get Cliff and Latasha, Black Voters Matter, involved. Maybe we get, there are people that do this door to door, even in a pandemic. Maybe this is the time to start doing that, because if Chicago's going to be the thing that they're using as a tool, we have to thwart that.